podcast. Again, I'm always listening to a million podcasts, but just going to I'll recommend a couple this week. As I mentioned before, I was listening to a bunch of podcasts on Yang Ye's channel where they're talking to different Metal Gear Solid people. Chances are you probably don't care about that, but check out Yang Ye's channel if you are. Something you might care about. I've been listening to more Howard Stern stuff lately. Again, I would never listen to him on a daily basis, but when he's interviewing someone that I really care about, it's kind of fun to seek out those interviews. So I ended up listening to 2 Robert Downey interviews with him and Howard Stern. One back when The Judge had just come out. So I think that was also pretty soon after Iron Man 3. And the most fascinating thing I took from that was he was talking about his 7-year relationship with Sarah Jessica Parker. And of course, Howard always probes just a little bit too far and then has to pull back a little bit, but it always gets some interesting things out of the people he's talking to. And, Robert Downey Jr. brought up oh, I'm in the city, yeah, I'm going to go visit her, and I want to tell Matthew Broderick that I'm seeing her because it's polite, blah, 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 blah. Something kind of interesting thing about that is someone in my office was chaperoning a trip to Ellis Island for her kid last week, I think it was Wednesday, and Sarah Jessica Parker was one of the volunteer chaperones on the trip, and she ended up talking to her a little bit, and they, kind of hit it off as much as you can with someone that's in a totally different part of the universe as you are, and, they got to talking about Ireland, and Sarah Jessica Parker was like, oh, I have a house there, you should visit, and then kind of had this moment where she's like, why did I just invite a complete stranger to my house in Ireland? But it sounds like she's a total sweetheart, which is great. My mom loved watching Sex and the City growing up and made me watch it in a weird way, which is kind of interesting. But Robert Downey Jr., and that was a couple years ago. That was a great interview. And then he did one a couple weeks ago, which was also fantastic. And he talked about doing his 50th birthday party and how grateful he is for all the wonderful movie roles he's getting, the opportunities. Geppetto in both of these interviews is touched on is when am I going to get to do this Geppetto movie, where he wants to play both Geppetto and Pinocchio, and I guess he has an interesting spin on it, so we'll see where that goes. But I recommend both of those interviews. One other Howard Stern one I checked out was with Amy Poehler, who of course I love and miss because Parks and Recreation is over, so she was on to talk a little bit about her book, and she's a huge fan of Howard Stern, so it's always interesting because, again, not a huge fan of Howard Stern, I just like some of the people that he interviews, and it's always interesting when someone that I really like is being interviewed by him and can't stop talking about how huge of a fan they are. So that was the case with Amy Poehler and kind of fascinating. But all 3 of those interviews I would definitely recommend checking out. One more podcast recommendation. I've been listening to this for a few weeks now. Rich Sommer, who plays Harry Crane on Mad Men, has a new podcast now called Cardboard, or it's called the Cardboard Cast or something like that. And it's interesting because it's an audio podcast talking about board games. And board games, of course, are inherently visual. That's why Will Wheaton has Tabletop on the Geek and Sundry YouTube channel to talk about and show off playing actual board games, whereas Rich just kind of talks about them. And for the most part, it works. He is able to explain things in a fairly interesting way, and he has an interview segment in every podcast so far where he's talking to someone just about their experience playing board games, and it's less about the minutia of, what a turn-to-turn bit of board gaming is like. I think his primary goal is to get people excited about board games, and then if they want to go try one out on their own, then that's great. So, again, Will Wheaton has a show where you're watching an entire game play out for a board game. Rich is doing something more category-based where, last week he was just oh, we're going to talk about sports board games, sports that have tried to make their way into the world of board games. So that was kind of interesting. And just from listening to that probably inspired me to, at the church yard sale I was at last week, to pick up a lacrosse card game, which was, I have no idea what it's like yet. I haven't played it, but so there's definitely an inspirational quality to it. If you want to hear someone talk about board games, check that out, Cardboard Cast. I only listen to podcasts that I really like, so pretty much you're always going to hear me say that all the podcasts I'm listening to, 5 stars with confidence of 5. Oh.